essentially I'm working within this 35-meter hallway, and I have to create 25-foot long jumpers, sub
Mhm.
21 second 200 runners, or 20-foot women's long jumpers. I can do acceleration. Like, I can do endless acceleration. I could do plyometrics. I can get very strong in the weight room because I knew that the things I could do, I had to be better than everyone else at.
That was Bob Thurnhoffer, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's podcast is sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a frictionless gym and studio management software. It can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. To check out what Gym Studio can do for you, head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Welcome to another episode of the podcast, and thanks for tuning in. This week's guest is Bob Thurnhoffer. Bob is an assistant track and field coach at the University of Louisville, and he has nearly 2 decades of NCAA Division I coaching experience. Bob is well known within the track and field community for his knowledge of jump and sprint training, as well as all things speed and power development. On today's show, Bob talks about his formative experiences from his past work training athletes out of a hallway for their sprint and jump training needs, and he goes into his current thoughts on plyometric training, acceleration development, complex training in the weight room, general strength development, and much more. He also gets into the nuts and bolts of his weekly training setups for his jumpers and sprinters. This was a fantastic show with concepts not only for track and field, but with speed and power applications for all athletes. Really enjoyed talking to Bob. Let's get on to 461 here with Bob Thurnhoffer. Bob, it's awesome to have you on the show. I feel like this episode has been a long time coming. I know we have a lot of common interests. I think this is going to be a great conversation. So thanks for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be on here, Joel. I mean, I've been a lifer listening to the podcast since you've been doing it. Gosh, probably a decade or so. And so, yeah, definitely checking one off the bucket list here. So, yeah, really fun to be on the podcast with you.
Yeah, I think we had pretty similar backgrounds. Well, we're both jump backgrounds, similar age. And I know too, and I always enjoy talking with people who, when you came up in your own training, you didn't have like the world of coaching. It was a lot of figure it out yourself and a lot of I think you had a big improvement curve over time too. And I'm always interested with how your own experience as an athlete, where you had to problem solve and, intuit on your own versus the coaching you got and how that evolved over time. Tell me a little bit about your own trajectory as an athlete, the coaches you had and how that's influenced where you are now.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in high school is when I started track and field or participating in track and field. But kind of strangely enough, I became really intensely interested in the sport all the way back in grade school, watching the '92 Olympics. And so it was like a fascination of watching Mike Powell versus Carl Lewis at the '92 Olympics that really kind of spawned my interest in what, athletics or what the human body can achieve. And so I always had this like curiosity in that sport. And I really liked the individualization and the almost the simplicity element of track and field. How fast are you? How far you can jump? It's not a game where you strategize against an opponent like like all team sports and what's most popular in America, if you will. And so I always had that fascination going back to grade school. And then I didn't actually start competing in the sport until freshman year of high school. And I was the definition of mediocre in high school, nothing special. I worked really hard. I was definitely very coachable, but I never made the state meet in Illinois. I was a Chicagoland kid. I got 5th at the sectional meet, and the top 2 make it in a torrential downpour at York High School in Elmhurst. And so that was the end of my high school career. And, yeah, I came from pretty modest upbringing, raised by a single mom in the Chicagoland area. And so I had to pay for school myself and my grades weren't very good. So JUCO was really my only option. And so I went to JUCO, College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, Illinois. And that's when I feel like that's when my coaching influences became like really prominent. Coach Jean Batchev was the head coach there, and she saw a lot of potential in me as both an athlete and as like a leader, if you will, and then as a coach down the road. And then we had at the time was the American record holder Tom Puxis
Oh, nice.
uh, in the javelin, and so he was there as an assistant coach, and me and him just kind of like hit it off because I was like I was becoming an exercise science nerd in that
Mm.
time, and he was extremely well versed in training and had competed in several Olympics, American record holder, and so like he kind of like sort of took me under his wing at that time, and so we would do a lot of one-on-one training together. Like I would lift with him, and we would do like plyo sessions in the hallway together, like compete in the standing triple jump together. And so he kind of showed me what like the intent and the seriousness of training is like, and
Mm.
how plyometrics and lifting and all these interrelated factors kind of go together. And so I feel like that's probably what really spurred my future into coaching. We had a really good strength coach there named Matt Say. I'm not sure, he was at Benedictine recently, but I'm not sure if he's still there or not. But yeah, he was great too, and he kind of taught me a lot about strength training and power development and whatnot. And so I went on to do really well at JUCO as a regional champ and NJCAA qualifier. But I think it was like what really helped me was just being under the guidance of like Tom and Matt and Coach Batchev and then really showing me that like lifestyle matters and the intent in the weight room matters and specificity in training matters. Like I'd started to do quite a lot of bounding training for triple jump, which I didn't really do at all in high
Mm.
school. And I started to get a feel for timing and sequencing and my lifting numbers were going up quite a lot as well. And so yeah, I improved like 6 feet in JUCO and then transferred to University of Illinois Chicago, where Jim Canedo was the head coach, who is still a good friend of mine to this day. And he helped me get the job at New Mexico after my time at Loyola and whatnot. And but I didn't have a jumps coach at UIC. We had like a volunteer that was there for a little bit, but she was kind of there just like once or twice a week to watch our approaches and whatnot.
Mhm.
But so I kind of self-coached myself at UIC, which was good for my future development as a coach, I think.
Mhm.
But I do think it probably cost me a lot in terms of my performance as an athlete because I probably needed a little more guidance and structure because I was reading all these things
Right.
on Rikoshansky's shock
Mm.
method and trying all these sprint training, doing all these insane bounding sessions for 2 hours.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I think I was like probably overstimulated with my thoughts because of I was majoring in exercise science and taking these more advanced courses back then and kind of getting online. I think what was it Track Shark? I think it was a
Oh, yeah.
website back then. Yeah, and I was getting on there and reading all the posts and getting all these ideas and coming up with ideas of my own and I do think like I kind of struck gold with some things, but then I was way off
Mhm.
on a lot of other things, and so but yeah, overall I think that's yeah, in terms of influences, those are some big ones for me for sure.
Yeah, I love hearing that story, and it makes me think too of like when I was almost like sometimes we get just what we need in respect to what our future will be. And I even for me, I look back on it's almost like the hero's journey, or it is. Like you think about the mentors you had, and it was the right person at the right time. Like you said, Tom
Mm.
Javelin, who taught you that intention with training. And
Yeah, it was massive. Yeah.
yeah, it's
Because
it.
even like back then, like when Tom was like a mentor at that time, it was like a really challenging time in my life in the sense that I didn't know what direction I was going to take my career. I wasn't really established as an athlete yet. And then I also like I had lost my dad tragically during that time as well. And so it's like when I think of like most formative times in my life, that second year in JUCO was like that's the time I always think of. And
Mm,
Tom was such a huge helped to me professionally and personally, so.
Yeah. I think as a coach too, or for anyone who's a coach, just thinking about, a lot of times we just think about sets and reps and exercises and getting results, but there's also like you're having an impact on people. And I think about, when I was in college, I was self-coached through, I always had this interesting kind of, I had workouts given to me by coaches, but then when it came to my event, I was usually self-coached. It's like, all right, well, we don't have a high jump coach, Joel, so I would go pull the mats out in our parking lot of our school and jump in the parking lot because the elementary school gym was too dusty and I got no traction. So it was like I jogged to the, I jogged like a mile to this elementary school. These are like stories that grandpa tells the kids, and then I pull the pits out and then I jump and I had no idea what I was really doing. But in some regards, I always think of it like, I like how, like the idea, like in baseball, it was Devin Hayes who was talking about baseball coach, coordinator for the Tigers, who was talking about in pitching, just letting a person do their form basically until they peak out, like early. And I think pitching is a lot more natural than like high jump. There's a lot more stuff going on as soon as you have a high jump and over a bar. But in some respects, I think it was good for me to at least lay my high jump foundation without outside influence. And part of it was who I was. Just I need to figure this out myself, and for whatever that's worth. I had teammates who were like, "Help me, coach me," and I was always like, "I want to figure this out." I will say I took on hurdles as a senior in high school, and I need help for this event. Like I'm not gonna. This is kind of intense and a little intimidating, and I need some help. But I think because jumping was always my thing, I always wanted to. But then I got to college, and I had this perfect situation in so many ways looking back, because I had a head coach who was a really good program writer, big physical education background, was very mindful with workouts and progressions. And then I had an assistant who was really good. He knew I kind of thought I knew it all and wanted to learn it myself. And I also had a fractured kind of confidence. Like I was insecure. My confidence was severely lacking. So he had this, it was like a double front of, he really helped improve my confidence and helped me to take it lightly. But he also, to help my technique, he wouldn't say do this. He'd be like, "Hey, I got this Russian high jump coach friend, and he says this is what they do." And I was like, "Oh yeah," and so I'd go do that in practice. And eventually, I figured it out to the point where I think technically I almost got to, in some ways, I know there were still things I could have improved on, but a ceiling I don't think I would have hit if I was really formally instructed,
Right.
to a degree. Just how I was wired. And so I look at like those influences in my life, and I'm like, wow, that was so incredibly helpful. So it's interesting to see that and how your training transformed over time. And the other thing I was going to say, Bob, was that I just think it's so cool how those of us who figured it out ourselves a lot, we always do those stupid workouts where it's like, like you said, bounding for 2 hours. It reminds me of Brady Vollmering doing like a workout with 600 depth landings or something and could barely walk the next day. But but you learn through those. And I remember doing dumb stuff. I did have a little free license in my own training. I remember one time it was a squat workout, but I was reading, when I switched my major from athletic training to exercise science, I just went on a tear. And this was 2005, and whatever was on the internet, and I just printed out every Louis Simmons West Side thing because I'm like, strength, yes. And so I did banded squats one day late in the season, just strapped the big green bands on. I was so sore the next day. It was so bad. Like I was like 3 days to recover, in nationals was like in 2 or 3 weeks.
God, yeah. Like the timing of it was way off.
There was many mistakes but a lot of those mistakes, it's like you look back at those formative years. And that's so much of where we draw from as coaches, is our own experience in our formative years and the mistakes we made, the mentors we had. And I think it really helps us along. So I wanted to transition that too, because I know, in addition to, the learning yourself, the mentors you had, that improvement over time, you've had some track coaching situations where you've been extremely limited. And I know in talking with people on this podcast, like Dan John, he talks about the gift of limitation, like coaching people with rocks and shot put. And I think about Tony Wells, the famous sprint coach, he was in the hallways in the winter. And where I was at Wilmington College, my first coaching job, they were training on the stairs in the hallways and had a really good team. Historically, in like the 4x4, because they kind of viewed it as a challenge. And it's always interesting to see what gets born out of limitation. And I'd love to hear your perspective of what was born out of limitation in your early coaching.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, you hit on a lot of things when you sent me the questions. You like I was thinking about like what I'd
Mhm.
say, and you kind of hit on a lot of things that I feel like I learned during my time at my almost 12 years at Loyola, where basically the situation was, we're in the north side of Chicago, weather is not good, generally very cold climate, no indoor track, no outdoor track, and so the only thing I mean, you're talking about 70% of the year you're indoors for the most part. The only time you have good weather is maybe September into early October, and then maybe probably not till May, end of April.
Mhm.
I mean, some really rough years, yeah, it could really be that way. And so maybe you get some off days where you catch a good day, but so you're kind of stuck indoors most of the time. And so what we had is we had this storage closet in the basketball Gentile Arena in the basketball arena. Um, and we had the storage closet. We had like 25 slabs of rollout track, and they all weighed, 200 pounds.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
guessing very, very heavy. And they all were about maybe 10 to 15 meters long. And so basically, I had these like little four-wheel carts. They were about, 2.5 feet long. And but they were real sturdy. So I just pushed the rollout track onto the cart, push the cart out, roll it out in a hallway, shimmy it around to get it straight, go get the next one, connect it. There's always be a flap, over it just so there's no like because it was just concrete underneath. And so, it's very less than ideal, and it involved like an immense amount of physical labor. And so yeah, you basically had to construct a track from scratch every day, and then you had to clean it up every night. And so basically that kind of relegated us to essentially what was wall to wall, about maybe 50 to 55 meters wall to wall, which means I got about 35 meters to work with for the most part. And so it's like, okay, I'm in this environment, limited resources financially and facility wise, but I got to contend for Missouri Valley Conference titles and podium spots, NCAA regional qualifying, and maybe an NCAA qualifier from time to time. And so kind of like you said, I do think it's like limitations breed creativity more than freedom of possibilities. Unlimited situations
Mhm.
don't create creativity as much as limitations do. And so because yeah, I mean, essentially, I'm working within this 35-meter hallway, and I have to create 25-foot long jumpers, sub
Mhm.
21 second 200 runners, or 20-foot women's long jumpers, 41-foot women's triplers, or whatever the number is. Back when those numbers were actually good, a
Yeah.
decade ago, maybe not as
Mhm.
much anymore, right? But before super spikes and super mondo x double
Mhm.
whatever the hell track they got these days. I don't know what they're
Yeah.
on now, but yeah, no, it was I just you look at those circumstances and you realize, okay, I can't really do absolute speed work. I kind of can touch on it slightly. I can't do speed endurance, not an
Mhm.
option.
Yeah.
I can do acceleration. Like I can do endless acceleration. I can just about fit full approach work for
Mhm.
horizontal jumpers. For most of them, I could fit it in there. Some of them barely. Uh, I could do plyometrics. I can get very strong in the weight room. And so yeah, so that those things that I could do, I just tried to do the absolute hell out of it
Yeah.
and try to learn how to be truly great at these things that I can do. Because I knew that the things I could do, I had to be better than everyone else at.
Mm.
Because there's this whole
Yeah.
uh, inventory of things that I simply cannot do, or I can't do until the weather breaks in mid to late April, at least. And so I just learned to get great at acceleration. I learned the importance of reactivity and how to progress reactivity over time. I developed methods through this to try to get better transfer through acceleration work and reactivity. I learned how to program Olympic lifts and static lifts and complexing in the weight room to maximize force and power potential. And so those were kind of my bedrock. And then I'd say, this is something you had mentioned in the questions, but general training was huge for us. Recovery based work was massive for us because if I'm going to go full throttle on hyper intense neural training, the recovery general work had to complement that. And so I really learned the value of that. And I just I think over my time there, the more I learned over 12 years, because I would study, I was doing the USTF CCCA curriculum, did all the courses, I learned everything from Boo. Um, I was pretty well connected with all the people at Altus. Chidi Enya, who coached there for many years, was a very close friend of mine, going back over 20 years. And so he kind of gave me a lot of info. We had a lot of conversations, and I was just always trying to find new ways, and so that 12 years was, I would say when people ask me, did you have a mentor? I was like, I mean, I would say Boo, if anyone, is my mentor, but it's not like I'm calling Boo up all the time. We're having conversations. I talk to Boo on the phone maybe once a year, and something like that. But my mentor was the conditions at Loyola. That was my mentor, 100%. And so yeah, I think that like when you have such limited conditions to work in, and you have high aspirations as well, it's though, and you recruit athletes that are like-minded to you over, the course of over a decade. You create these conditions where we're always trying to figure things out. It felt like every day at practice, it was like experimentation.
Yeah.
Like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, hey, what do you think about this progression? And like, I remember Eric Burns was a long jumper I coached there. Unfortunately, his career got cut because of COVID. But I felt like we had struck gold that 2019 fall to 2020 indoor season, and we were playing with the 1080 in all these different ways, and we were just having all this dialogue and conversation, and we are figuring out these methods that seem to be working really, really well, and methods to transfer and with assisted sprinting and resisted sprinting. And unfortunately, COVID cut his career short, but I think like it was just that ethos of myself being really motivated to reach high levels of performance, win Missouri Valley Conference titles, NCAA qualifiers, within this extremely limited situation, and then having like-minded athletes really created it was a very challenging environment where I mean, I remember that 2021 season, we were so reduced because of COVID restrictions. That was like the most burnt out I've ever been in my life, was that 2021 year. So it was unbelievably challenging mentally and physically to build a track and tear down a track really every day. And then, but then also like the more you learn, the more you realize the limitations you have, the more you learn about training and programming, the more you realize, wow, we're not just slightly limited, we're severely compromised here. And so it was, I definitely wouldn't trade it for anything, but also I could never do it again. I don't think I'd last the week right now if I had to do that again, because it was of the challenges it caused, but it was really fruitful. I mean, yeah, just I was definitely one of the early users of the 1080, because when I was named the head coach in fall 2016, I kind of used the whole grace period of being a first year head coach and did a little budget gymnastics to get a 1080. We just kind of cut a few meets and made some compromises in the budget so we could purchase it. And so I think like getting that technology and having that intense interest to improve, and then being able to work with the data on the 1080 really created this great environment for me to really grow and get nourished as a coach. And so yeah, it was great. I mean, it really pushed me. But yeah, I definitely would never want to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds very similar to like Chris Corfist when he was at Montini. 1080 in the hallway. I'm sure one of the best ways to learn about it, all the nuances of a 1080 and acceleration, is to be very limited with how far you can go. So I'd love to talk nuts and bolts of what did that boil down to? And I resonate with that because when I was at Wilmington, when I was 25, 26, it's like, okay, you're going to train, but you have a 35-meter-ish hallway. You have a weight room. I could roll at a track, or I could roll at like a runway in the hallway, and then the weight room had like a rubber floor. So for 20 meters of bounding tops. And it was really interesting because I look back on that time when I didn't know a lot of I mean, I was so behind in all the technical stuff, but I've been obsessing on speed and power for 10 years at least, 15, 12, 13 years at that point. And I remember I had one pole vaulter where this was our workout, basically. After the fall, it started getting cold, and a lot of the late fall mirrored this type of schedule, but it was Monday would be weights, power in the weight room, and then we'd kind of cool down with like tempo on the indoor hallway, 40 meters, down, back, type thing. Probably like 800 meters total. It was not crazy because it was just kind of a weird thing. And then that was Monday and Thursday. And then Tuesday and Friday was like explosive plyometrics. And I don't even think we did much short acceleration. To be honest, it's funny because where I was at, I don't think I really prioritize acceleration the way I do now. But and just to be a high jumper, a triple jumper, it's like, yeah, plyos, bounding, depth jumps, and all that. And we did the heck out of that. And we did I remember there was a bounding circuit we always did in the weight room. And it was like a Verkhoshansky one where your first 20 is alternate leg bounding, boom, boom, boom. Then you go left, right, all the way down. Then you go left, right. Then you do single leg. And we would do that usually like 2 rounds or something like that, do some depth jumps or hurdle hop type things, warm up. And that was like the power day. And then that was Tuesday, Friday. And then Wednesday and Saturday was capacity days. Indoors, we'd like just run around and do scramble circuits is what my coach had called them, where you just jog. You hit a spot. All right, we're going to do 20 sit-ups here. Yeah. You keep jogging. It's kind of like GPP or general strength. And eventually, though, that became replaced with short approach pole vault. So you're throwing like another explosive day in the mix. But it was short approach, so it limited the CNS. But moral of the story is I had this pole vaulter who got insanely fast doing that without really sprinting a lot. And I look back on that, and I mean, this guy was just shredding sprint times. I think he dropped like almost a full second, the 200. Coming off of that, as soon as he got outdoors and ran 200s, he dropped like a full second. He was the fastest he'd ever been on the runway. And I look back and I think about James Wild's quadrant of, you have the long stride and the short stride and people who like to use the air a lot or, and he was definitely more of a spinner type coming in, like probably quicker strides, as I remember, quicker on the ground. And James had said, look, you give that spinner plyos and that all their airtime elastic qualities are going to improve. So I look back and I'm like, yeah, I hit the nail on the head with that kid because that was his biggest need by far, and I think my strength power programming was pretty good. So it's just interesting to think back on what you learned there. But if I had like a bounder type person who needed speed, I would have had to be more creative. I would have had to think outside of that plyometric and just strength box. And I would have had to probably do I would have done different things with the tempo variations and the frequency, stride frequency stuff. But that was my kind of anecdote. One of those things that I learned pretty early. Oh, wow, this really, you can do this without this. And it's kind of cool to have the season. And then, all right, hey, it's nice outside. I mean, if you're in the Midwest, you know how just lovely it is it's 10 degrees and then all of a sudden it's like 45 or 50. Hey, let's get out and sprint. This is awesome, And so, anyways, I'd be curious with some like nuts and bolts anecdotes, any things you did that were like, wow, that you maybe even take with you now, like pieces of that indoor hallway experience that you feel you've taken with you as you've actually had a track and technology and all those things.
Right, man. Yeah, I mean, I think like during all that time when I had all those limitations, the other side of it was I was always, because I'm like a really copious note taker, like I've still to this day, after every practice, I sit down and I have Word documents where I type up notes for the day it's a summary of what we did, but then it's a summary of like things I think went really well that I need to stick with, and then things I need to improve on. And so during that time, I would also, another component that I do while I do this note taking is what would I do at this time if I had facilities? Because I always had this in the back of my mind that like maybe someday I'm going to go to a place that has adequate facilities. And so I was always thinking about that. I mean, I think in terms of like what I did back then to what I did, when went to New Mexico and to what I do now. And I would say it's very similar, honestly. Like there's really not a whole lot of difference in terms of like I still really heavily emphasize reactivity. I'm really big on the weight room, on in terms of developing rate of force development, and absolute strength is still huge in my program. I still work general training a very, very large degree, probably more than most coaches.
Mm.
Even yeah, I remember Brooke, the pole vault coach at Louisville. She said to me at the start of the year how she really liked how much general strength I do. She's like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I don't know, coaches never do that anymore." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Man, that's like to me almost the foundational thing that we do, you know." And so, so I wouldn't say there's a whole lot of difference to what I did then to now. The only difference being that I can progress into absolute speed. I can progress into speed endurance. I can probably do more volume of plyometrics because I have access to a giant grass field and softer surfaces. I don't have to just do bounding on a little rollout track where
Hmm.
concrete is underneath, that I have
Yeah.
to kind of limit the amount of bounding I do in that situation. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of like maybe nuances and individualization, I've always struggle with individualization because at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you got to get faster. Long jumper has to work on long jump. That's not really individualization. But to me, individualization is like you kind of bend training five to ten
Hmm.
percent this way or 5 to 10% that way. But the actual activities are probably not that much different. And so some nuggets that I had back that I learned back at Loyola, for example, like if we were doing an acceleration session with the 1080, like in that hallway, and I have like a lot of the time I'd have freshmen coming into the program and they're kind of like you had mentioned with that guy, like spinning the wheels
Hmm.
and not understanding force application. Um, that like I would tend to give those kids that didn't have a sound acceleration technical model. I might if the workout is written like I'll just say 130-meter resisted 1080 followed by 130-meter unresisted.
Hmm.
I'll just write that, but I won't give like volumes or
Yeah.
anything. But I'll just maybe I'll tell this freshman who doesn't have the technical model that I want in the acceleration, like, hey, you're just gonna do all like resisted work, but I'm gonna like gradually decrease the load
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
it because typically with a light resisted acceleration, I mean, the technical model is probably gonna be pretty good.
Hmm.
Like you can't really screw it up that much, and so I'm just gonna like shift the volume of resisted work over to the younger athlete. Uh, it'll be 80% resisted and 20% unresisted, or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas like maybe a more experienced athlete, maybe we'll just give them a little dab of resisted work, and then we're just
Oh,
hitting
yeah.
the unresisted. I probably got the timing gates up, and we're chasing performance clusters within the session, or PBs over a block 35 or whatever it is. And so I've made like modifications that way a lot. And then even like with say bounding for triple jumpers, like for younger athletes, I might treat it more like a boo half bound where the knee doesn't come
Yeah.
above
Yeah.
the hip and it's very controlled. We're working on posture. We're working on swinging segments, flat-footed contacts, and the effort level is dialed down to say, we'll just say 80% or whatever it is. Whereas maybe a more
Yeah.
advanced triple jumper, I might crank it up, and get them trying to get maximal displacement and jump as far as possible. Maybe I have some cones for them to target. Maybe I put a weight vest on them for a little bit of like a special strength effect and potentiation as well. And so I do think like with individualization and nuance and training, you can have one session and then you just sort of bend it one way or the other based on the needs of the individual. And so that's something I did a lot at Loyola, in terms of the speed and the reactive type training. And yeah, I had several women's triple jumpers that were nursing uh uh either or coming off a stress fracture, or they had stress reactions in their tibia that for whatever reason that was common for me at Loyola. And actually I have one girl on the team that's coming off that right now that I'm coaching. Um, but I knew I had a very limited exposure to triple jump and bounding type work. So, but obviously you have to do triple jump, right? And
Yeah.
so I had another way I did it with, say, those two that come to mind. Sarah and Oyen Lola were their names, or are their names. But yeah, I coached them in like 2019, 2020, uh into 21. And but we would do one sprint approach day, one triple jump with a very small dose of bounding in there, and then everything else was general training. It
Yeah.
was 4 to 5 days, 5 days a week of bike workouts, general strength circuits, uh, bodybuilding circuits, if you want to
Hmm.
call it that. I did a lot of coordination based work with them. And so, I think you can just make those simple modifications based on the demands of the event as well as the nuances of the individual.
Yeah. I wonder if there's any research. This is a little bit of a side note, but someone should do this as a thesis. It wouldn't even be like sports performance, more like maybe some sort of sociology. But I swear there's probably a link between the academic rigor of an institution and stress fracture rates.
Man,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
merit to that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to that. I even like I coached at New Mexico this guy, his name is Javon Williamson. He was a foreigner runner but he came to New Mexico to go to grad school, but he was a Harvard grad. And he used to tell me like he was so relieved to be out of there in a way. Like he was thrilled to have gone to Harvard and got a Harvard degree, but it's just like the toll it takes on you to, get an Ivy League education definitely would take away a bit from your athletic performance. And then interestingly enough, I coach his brother now at Louisville, who was also an Ivy League grad. He went to Cornell, Jamar, and so he's on the team now doing grad school at Louisville. And it's kind of interesting to hear their perspectives on an academically rigorous undergrad versus they go to grad school. It's still challenging, but it's not as intense, if you will. So,
Right.
so I do think there's a lot of merit to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I like you brought up the Loney, like the half bounds or the mini bounds. I've heard them called pops. And it's just funny because I'm like, I knew nothing of this through my college experience, through my 20s. And it wasn't until probably the last, I don't know, eight. Well, I've seen the boost stuff, like those ones when he's at the LSU track or the athletes are at the LSU track. Those are the classic. And I've
Yeah.
seen it there. But outside of that, I don't see much of it. But I know those pops. I like if I would go back and rewrite some of those bounding complexes. And again, for like the super spinners,
Yeah.
that works to improve your stride length. But for the people who
Absolutely.
need, if okay, I'm training reactivity in a small space. Like people like myself, like I can bound, like I can get the stride length. I need the quality and the quickness of the ground contact. So if I was rewriting that for myself, I would have done that whole bound complex I mentioned, all pop version, all like kind of half bounding lower knees, maybe 2 rounds of that, and then 1 round, and you can let the knees come up and that kind of thing. And I look at how you talk about like the resisted for the freshmen, people who aren't used to it. And I would agree, it is hard to have good resistance and fully mess up that acceleration.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
self-teaching tool in many respects.
Totally.
But I think about it like, Mr. Miyagi and Daniel painting the fence. It's like the pops and the low knee and the resistance, like you got to paint the fence as a freshman and then I'll let you, even
Yeah.
though there's
That's
probably a
right.
lot of motor learning fallacy in that movie, there's no representation in painting the fence and then all of a sudden you can fight somebody. But
Yeah.
I don't think it would quite work like that
Easy.
cool movie, but it does. I do think about that. Yeah, those younger athletes, like, I love how you logistically steer without like, all right, you advance are over here and you freshmen are over here doing this thing. It's like, no, it's the
Oh,
same
yeah.
workout, but we're going to steer this workout towards more of your current need. And it's almost like a reward once you have put the paces in and you've achieved those basics. And it does speak to, I think we're always looking for, oh man, what's this magic workout at some point? Well, it's like once you're really good, the workouts are actually more simple in the sense of you doing what you do.
Yeah.
It's like when you're a beginner, you need the other stuff to bridge those gaps. And
Yeah.
once you bridge the gap, you've reached
Kinda
that
there
another
in a
level.
way.
Yeah. Now
Yeah.
you
No, I
now-
think
yeah.
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so I love to. I love what you mentioned. A couple things. I do want to kind of maybe clear up or refine any more ideas on that reactive like system in the sense of the reactive system born out of that, and maybe go through a little bit more of okay, what did the plyo days look like? What was the volumes look like? And obviously you needed the general strength, and then I want to get to the general strength. Because I agree, I love doing these episodes. I love talking speed and power, and we all do. But like you said, I think there was a big lack of that just general strength, capacity, because you can have the best plyo program in the world, but if you can't recover from it very well, and you don't have the physical literacy that surrounds it, you're kind of you're continually hitting your head into a ceiling. That's not gonna,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about, okay, so like average week, Loyola hallways. I know you mentioned a little bit already with the resisted, but tell me a little bit more about what like the reactivity, the plyos, how that worked into the weight room, and how you're bridging those gaps without being able to get out and do all the top end work.
Yeah, I kind of had two formats, two weekly formats, if you will. It sort of depended on the event. It sort of depended on the athlete. Well, I guess three formats with respect to those triple jump women that I mentioned. But predominantly, I either went to a Monday, Wednesday, Friday neural with Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday general, if you will. Although Saturday was kind of maybe more extensive using boost terms like tempo. Um, so that was one format that I typically use with sprinters for the most part. But then I also had another format where it was like Monday, Tuesday neural, and then I actually would go Wednesday, Thursday general, and then Friday neural again, Saturday general or extensive. So that was sort of my two weekly formats. Um, Interestingly enough, I actually at New Mexico, I almost entirely went to Monday, Tuesday neural, Wednesday, Thursday general, Friday neural. The whole 2 years I was there for everyone, and it worked great, very well. And so yeah, it kind of depended on the athlete, or it depended on the event group that they're in, whether the microcycle design that I would go to. But yeah, I mean, if I was to use like say, do you want a jumper or a sprinter?
Let's go jumper, just because in some ways I feel like if it's a team sport strength coach listening to this, the jumper training I think is a little more multilateral and universal in many respects. So let's start there.
That's a good point. So yeah, Monday would typically be a speed day. So yeah, that's when we're working the 1080. You know, once again, we can only work acceleration. That's all I can do. So I'll give you long jump. And so Monday would be Excel day. Depends on the time of year, whether we're working like a complex of heavy resisted or with unresisted, or light resisted with unresisted. But we'll just say it's like kind of later in the year. So we'd probably do one light resisted followed by one unresisted. It's either going to be 30 or at most I can go 35 meters. That's all I got. And so yeah, and I'm probably chasing a certain peak velocity on the 1080 at a given resistance. And so with guys, I would always look for a peak velocity of 9 meters per second. And then once they hit that at 3 kg, we would target 4 kg. And once they got 4 kg, we would target 5 kg. And when we're targeting that peak velocity at a given resistance, that means we're kind of working around it to try to potentiate getting 9 meters per second at 5 kg, for example. So maybe we go 3 and then a 4, and then we'll hit a 5 to see where we're at. And they're like, okay, we're close. Let's go to 6 and see if we can kind of coax it out of you, and then we'll go back down to 5, things like that.
I love the waves.
Yeah, exactly. And so we would go at each 1080 session we are targeting 90 meters per second at 5 kg, for example. And so, and that will kind of manipulate where I go. But I'm always looking at I'm looking at the numbers to decide where to go during the session. So it's not like I have decided it already. You know what I mean? I'm deciding it within the session. But I'm always keeping an eye on transfer, and I think transfer is just inherently speed based, at least in my sport. Faster ground contact times, faster speeds, unresisted in general, right? That's the sport of track and field. Outside of throwing, I guess, right? And so I'm always keeping an eye on transfer. And so you do want to like try to get those performances at heavier resistances to bleed down into lighter resistances. So I'm typically always trying to pair 50-50 resisted, unresisted, maybe some individual nuances there. But then after the speed work or the acceleration work, I'm probably doing on a Monday, I would probably be doing depth drops, really stiff,
Mhm.
or some mixture of depth drops or hurdle hops with a pause, some kind of mixture in there. It's like really high stiffness. I'll put them up at 36 inches, or some guys I got over 42 to 45 inches fall off, stiff landing with a slight knee bend, to kind of complement the knee angle of acceleration. And then in the weight room, we would do power cleans. I did a lot of trap bar deadlift. I squats I would do in the fall, but usually on Friday, so they'd have the weekend to recover. Although sometimes I just throw squats on
Mhm.
Mondays for some mesos,
Mm.
just for the sake of variation. I think you need. I think we talk so much about as coaches like nuance progressions, but man, sometimes like you get too rigid in these things. You just got to kind of like, hey, you know what? We haven't done this in a while. Let's just do this. I think
Exactly. Yep.
variety
Yep.
is great. Like even now at Louisville, what I do with Olympic lifts, and I kind of did this in the past, but maybe I'm more intentional now, is like I generally have a speed, a force, and a power lifting sessions within a microcycle or a mesocycle. And then I just kind of plug in where I feel like I need to. And typically in season, Monday's a speed day and Tuesday's a force day, typically. But sometimes I'll just switch it
Yeah.
up for the
Yep.
sake of switching it up. And I'll switch the Olympic lifts that we do on the speed day, meso to meso. So like maybe it's snatch in the meso 6, and then meso 7 it's hang clean, and then in meso 8 it's power clean. I just kind of cycle through just to cycle through,
Yeah.
you know?
I
And
love.
so, but yeah, that's kind of a side note. But yeah, I mean, we're probably typically my lifting program is Olympic lifts. I'm just like most jumps coaches. Olympic lifts is kind of my everything in terms of
Mhm.
neuro lifting. And then it would either be a static lift complex or a ballistic lift complex,
Mm.
one of the two. And so, that's what we do in the weight room. But especially with static lifts or even with ballistic lifts, I almost always complex it with
Yeah.
something unweighted
Same.
or at least something lighter. Because once again, I'm always keeping an eye on transfer, and I always think in terms of transfer as being fast and unweighted or
Yes.
lightweight at least. And so I typically am doing some kind of complex with the static lift. Sometimes I'll complex Olympic lifts with a jump just to
Oh yeah.
not,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, and then I'll finish. I almost always finish a neural lift with med ball throws just to sort of restore proprioception after heavy lifting. I think it just you synchronize the whole body, explosive, lightweight power movement. And I think it sets them up good for the next day. And so yeah, that would be a Monday for say a long jumper. And then a Tuesday, we would probably be doing technical work. And so, um, I'll just hope that weather's good enough to go outside, even though we did for long jump technique works. I was notorious for going outside in 28 degrees,
Mm. Nice.
uh, because I kind of have to,
Yep. No
and
choice.
so I'm not a big drill guy. I think learning is very whole. I don't do a lot of partial type stuff. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's the classic, like coaches always ask me, what drills do you do? I'm like,
Mhm.
I got like 3 drills, man. Like I don't really do a whole lot of drills. I just do the event
Yeah.
and then I coach the athlete within the event, and so I'm very Boo like in that sense or Dan Path like in that sense. And so, yeah, a couple prep drills just to kind of get the feel or to introduce the concept of the day or the goal of the day. Like sometimes I'll tell an athlete like, hey, we're going to do 12 jumps and I'm looking for 8 of those jumps to have a takeoff length of 6 feet
Mhm.
or whatever, I'll put a cone on the penultimate and a cone on the board, just so they feel the proper spacing of the takeoff length.
Yeah.
I think that's massive in long jump because kids always just want to load up the jump and jump high. And I think like long jump, it's all about displacement, smoothness, being a passenger, letting the natural inherent reactivity that you've developed in training and that's
Yeah.
inherent in the human body do the jumping for you. Let the speed do the jumping for you. So, so we'll do a lot of takeoff. We'll do a couple drills. We'll do a lot of takeoffs. and then we'll land maybe, 6 to 10 jumps or whatever. And then, yeah, depending on the time of year or where we're at in the microcycle, I might finish with a general strength circuit after the technical work, just to create restoration from all the sprinting, the heavy lifting. Long jumping is jumping too, and so you have to be mindful of all those contexts that you're giving the athletes. And so I might finish with general strength. I would do a lot of coordination based work or Bosch type work, post technical work, because I think the rhythms of coordination based strength work is similar to that of like long jump technique. And sometimes you hit a lot of similar positions. So sometimes I would finish with that. Yeah, and then Wednesday and Thursday would just be general strength or mobility. Wednesday would usually be a little bit more calisthenic based, so the heart rate is getting elevated. Thursday would be maybe more mobility based. I would teach the athletes how to do RPR on themselves, and so we would do RPR. We would do sometimes I get some classical music going, and then we do some like deep breathing exercises, visualization type work. Very peaceful, melt into the ground. I still do some of that to this day. And then I would do, I also got certified in MAT. I don't know if you're familiar with
I
that.
got a jump start. I did the early, I didn't get the
I
actual,
did that too. Yep. I did that in 2016. It was pretty intense to get that. It was quite a lot of work. And so I would set up like 10 to 15 minute intervals with the athletes that I felt like really needed it. And I had my own massage table, and I would do MAT on them on Thursdays typically. And then Friday, ideally, I would like that to be something more like an absolute speed or like a speed endurance day. But weather permitting, it's probably not possible. But with the 1080, we would do assisted work, and that was my answer to the problem of hitting absolute speed within a 35-meter hallway. You don't want to see how hard they crashed into those high jump mats, though. You don't, trust me, you don't want to know. And so Friday would be like full approach work primarily, coupled with probably assisted sprinting, or if the athlete's not quite ready for assisted, we would just do like some unresisted 35s, or hopefully we could go outside to do something a bit longer. And then and then we would hit depth jumps that day on Friday as well to pair with the absolute speed. And sometimes I would, like early in the year, it's lower boxes, faster ground contact times. And then over the course of the fall, I'm gradually increasing the height, higher forces. And then I'm kind of moving into a complex where it's like maybe a few high box and then a few low box to try to potentiate the low box step jumps. And and then we would get another big lift in the weight room there on Friday. So 2 neural lifts a week typically. Yeah.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Just Fly Sports online courses, Elastic Essentials and Sprint Acceleration Essentials. These courses are CEU certified and will expand your viewpoint on explosive athletic performance and skill acquisition. You can head to justflysports.com and click on the courses tab and join the hundreds of other coaches who have already jumped in. Again, you can head to justflysports.com and click on the courses tab to get started. Yeah, I think one of the things as I've progressed in my thinking, we're probably strength in the beginning was just lift as much as you can. Plyos was just get the volume in and, hopefully get as high of a box as you can, react as high as you can. It's definitely gone in the direction of the lifting, using more like time under tension stuff, being more intentional with that. And then the plyos has gone in the direction of being poppier, valuing ground contact initially, and then it pushes more towards whatever you were initially doing. I really wanted to touch on, is because I just wrote this in an email. I just think it's interesting is so many people start with like the high-low, Charlie Francis, and you have 48 hours. And I think that's great. Like I think it's an awesome slick. It's way better than the stuff a lot of people are doing. It gets you on a good adaptation curve. But at some point, like you just said with the novelty, the arrangement of exercises in a session, something should change. And you can use it almost think of it as a problem to solve, just like the hallway. Your problem is you take that Wednesday and the Monday, Wednesday, Friday, that was all intense, and you shift it to Tuesday. How do you problem solve this week now and make it work? And it's such an interesting shift because of the pairing of those two front end days. And then and it's super intense. And now you have to be like, oh shoot, how do I recover from this? Now I got Wednesday and Thursday, and I gotta go as hard as
Yeah.
I can on recovery. So it's like it becomes more intentional what you're doing. And I should have the caveat. I was talking about my program with this pole vaulter that was so high intensity because it was Monday and Thursday lifting, Friday or Tuesday, Friday we did plyos, like tough plyos.
Yeah.
I would
Okay.
deload those kids every third week, which I think was kind of like what Tony Wells did. I,
Yeah.
I, I want to say that he would just go intense, and maybe that is another like plateau breaker. Is we're used to, okay, we
Sure.
got 3 weeks on and 1 week off or whatever,
Mhm.
and to make it more intense. But I found if I did too many of those 2 on 1 off blocks in a row, I got people after about 4 of those, it was like first one awesome, second one awesome, third one okay, and then oh man, like once I got to like the certain amount of those, it was just so taxing. It
Yeah.
just is a little too much. And so, that was an interesting learning experience for myself because I was like a kid in the candy shop. The first few of those I was doing, I started doing it myself, and then I was like working with athletes. This is great. And then all of a sudden we're middle of indoor or something, and I got some kids who are
And you're
just dying from a
crashed.
nervous
Yeah.
system
I have
perspective.
I have done like on that note though, like once again, it's like when I get asked about like training design and things like that, like I don't have like one thing. I'm a very fluid thinker
Sure.
and I'm always evolving. I'm always assessing. So I don't really have one way of always doing thing, but I have done microcycles within a mesocycle like that where I've
Mhm.
like hammered them really hard. And I only do it on week ones.
Yeah.
On a week one, and then maybe week it's almost like week 1 hyper intense because they're coming off the
Mhm.
recovery week. So I crush them week 1 and actually just kinda deload a little, but
Yeah.
still keeps good intensity week 2, and then maybe week 3 is a recovery, or it just depends on if I do a 3-week or a 4-week, which I do both really.
Yeah.
And so but I always found that, like, you get it in, but you kinda need to do it on the week 1 of a meso, and
Mhm.
that's it, you
Yeah.
know?
Where I've gone, and I like how you talked about too. I wanted to touch on this is you just the waves, like working with the 1080, you're working in waves around the target. And I mean, to me, so much of the art of all this happens. We have our starting point, we have our protocols, but the art's actually working in waves and you're intuitively making some decisions as the athlete goes and making it continually stimulating for them. Like I think sometimes if it's
Yeah,
just flat
right.
loading, all right, I got this. And, there's a certain mental way of going about it. But I find even too, just paying attention to, I had this thought just throwing javelin the other day. Like if you just say, hey, I'm going to go out and do 20 throws or 10 long jumps or whatever, like what do you pay attention to each of those jumps? Do you ever pay attention to what you pay attention to? And how many throws in a row you pay attention to the same thing? And if you start paying attention to the same thing for too many in a row and that's your only focus, it actually becomes kind of dull and monochromatic. And I even think too,
Definitely. Yep.
those 2 week on, 1 week offs that I kept running, they were great, but eventually it becomes monochromatic and
And
dull, and you
yeah,
need a new. It's like playing the chorus of a song over and over again, and you
yeah,
don't get a little respite. And so, one thing I really enjoy, I just feel like it allows more versatility, is looking at like Boris Chico's powerlifting programs week to week, where it's always like it's almost like week one. It seems like these always follow a somewhat similar pattern. It's like week one is pretty tough, week two is easy, week three is pretty tough, week four is easy, but there's always a different kind of way
yeah,
they
right.
fluctuate the
Kind of
wave of it.
fluctuating, yep.
But yeah, I just think that wave and that's where it really becomes an art form, because yes, we start with high low, we start with 3 weeks on, 1 week off or whatever, or maybe it's a beginner and it's 5 weeks on, 1 week off. But then eventually you have to start um, learning those waves of work. And so yeah, I like do you do like I was wondering if actually this just popped in my head, but like a plyometric equivalent, like is there a plyo equivalent to some of those waves? Like, because the 1080 you get the number, right? But like I'd be curious if there's something from that perspective of doing like waves of bounds or depth jumps or anything like that that you
Yep.
might do as
Yeah,
well.
definitely, yeah. Yeah, so I do, kinda a couple different ways. I might do, it could be you could apply this to bounding or to depth jumps. Those are kinda easy examples, but I'll just focus on depth jumps since probably more people that listen to
Yeah.
this podcast are gonna do depth jumps than bounding, right? And um so yeah, like typically I always think in terms of like speed, force, power, like applying that paradigm to kind of any neural activity. And so once again, you're always thinking about transfer and try to how to get faster ground contacts well, I mean, you could fake a fast ground contact in a depth jump. You want to keep the height as well,
Yeah.
right? And so it's always a delicate balance there. But yeah, typically like maybe early in the year when we start depth jumps, it's just like, we'll say for women, it's a 12-inch onto 12-inch double leg. And then maybe eventually that becomes 15 to 15, and then 18 to 18, then 24 to 24. Then I'll start to think, okay, now they've been exposed to 24 to 24, which is pretty darn high force, like very high. But now I got to start thinking about how can I get this big force to transfer to quicker ground contact. So then I might go to an 18 down to 24, or maybe I'll complex a few 24 to 24 with the 18 to 24. Or maybe I'll do go back down to 18 to 18 and I'll throw a weight vest on them, or I'll give them 2 dumbbells and I'll do a complex of some sort. So I always think there's nuances to that, and that's been extremely effective to me. Like maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but you had asked about like a lot of things that I measure, like in the questions you sent, like things that I measure in the weight room. And fortunately, we have endless technology here at Louisville. We have too much technology to where you could like go nuts, like measuring things. And so I almost have to like be careful about like how much I measure. Otherwise, I'm just going to go insane, And so, but we have Hawkins force plates in the weight room, which have been super cool to look at. And so we did it last year and we've done it this year. We measure a single leg depth jump with every single week with all the jumpers. And so it's been cool to measure. And the only thing I really look at is ground contact time and the height of the jump. I do look at braking phase. I do look at peak propulsive power, sort of like I kind of eye it, but really I'm just looking at the ground contact and the height of the jump, I think are the main things. RSI, I feel like, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical of RSI because you could get a great RSI and go this high off the ground. So I'm kind of like, okay,
that's how I get a good one. Just pin like a pinhead of a ground contact, and you're going to get a good RSI.
Yeah, like, oh man, you just got a 4.0 RSI. That's unbelievable. You're going to jump 29 feet now. It's like, I don't know about that. Yeah, so, but I mean, it's the quick ground contact time with the vertical displacement. That's what I'm looking for, and I have like, I kind of went through a lot of those depth jump progressions that I've just mentioned. I didn't give the exact format, but something along those lines. And it was cool to see, just like maybe a month ago, like Sinclair is our top long jumper. She just jumped a very slightly windy 661 on Saturday. And so her ground contact times on this depth jump test started going from like, she was typically like 0.26, 0.27, maybe a 0.25 here and there. Which I know sounds long because a long jump takeoff is typically 0.15, 0.16, but I can't get a depth jump to be that fast. I just can't.
Yeah. So, very difficult.
It's not I haven't been, but recently after we had gone through a lot of these depth jump progressions, and we had actually moved into single leg depth jumps for quite a while now and done some like weighted stuff as well. All of a sudden it started dropping down to 0.22 just in the past month. And we also saw a pairing with the velocity on her hang cleans have been going up too. And so you kind of felt like, ooh, I think we might be close here, and then she jumped 643 and 58 degrees 2 weeks ago in California, and then 661 this week. And so it's kind of cool to be able to measure those things and track that with that, depth jump progression that I just mentioned to kind of tease out that transfer into quicker ground contact times.
Yeah, I like a lot of the way that we create waves around a single stimuli. It reminds me a little bit too of, because it works for novices really well in a skill, and none of this is separate from skill, and that's why I love motor learning and skill talk. But that's, for some reason, if it's framed in that language, just you lose like half your listeners. But like Schulhorn,
man, that's such a good point.
It is. Is you gotta. It's just, maybe it's the way it's framed up, because this is all, to me, it's all speed and power work in the sense that you can't have one without the other. But Schulhorn had shown like differential learning. If I break shot put up into 200 different ways to throw, it's going to be superior to just doing, hey, throw the shot this way. But we can do the same stuff with depth jumps. Yeah, like you mentioned, like it's this box to this box. And one thing, it's funny, I saw this in like the 80s and like the old, I think it was in the Starzinski book, or maybe it's in the Jumps book by Boozy, but it's like, it's not just low box to high or medium to medium. You could also do a high box to low. And me
Yeah,
10 years ago or 15 would have been like, why would you do that? That's stupid because shouldn't it be higher? But it's like, well, no, it's like get up to that box with a quick contact time. And that's
yeah,
another
yeah.
way of learning another shade of how you do that. And if you did all sorts of different box to box and then you went and did your top set, it's probably going to be better than if you just go flat the whole way. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah.
why I haven't had a lot of my like the skill stuff, it revolves a lot of times it's on some different skills, but it's great to have one that revolves around bounding and depth jumps and these staples that
Right.
yes, if you're in track, you could do. If you're in team sports, you can also do a lot of variations of this stuff. So I'd love to talk more about that and the general strength. Unfortunately, I only have a few minutes left, so I'll close it out by saying this. We'll have to talk general strength and capacity on another show because I just think that is so important because everyone I love these conversations on how do we get these plyos and speed. But the
Yeah.
capacity is that like unsung hero. It's so vital. And but yeah, maybe I know Boo does a lot of good like general. I mean, who's just maybe in a minute, who is like your biggest sources of inspiration for where you've drawn some of that general strength from? I mean, Boo's work or
Oh, Boo for
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, Boo and Dan Paff
yeah,
is huge. And then like I said, like with Chidi Enya, who he's been away from Altus for many years now. But he was at Altus like working directly with Stu and Andreas and all of them for many years. And so he was a huge influence on me, especially in this category of training as well. And so yeah, I've drawn a lot from Boo and then by virtue of Chidi, Dan Paff as well. And then just a lot of my own, just kind of thinking about it, multi-directional type training, endocrine, building an
yeah.
endocrine profile, I think is really big and just like variety of movement, and I think I think you build a lot of proprioception when you do a lot of backward and rotational side to side movement. Track and field is so uniform.
Mm,
And so I think it's important to find things like general training where it's not uniform. It's very multi-directional variety, chaos. Like I have some warm-ups, actually some restoration warm-ups. I call them restoration warm-ups.
mm.
And it's just like a lot of like lateral movement,
Oh yeah.
back movement. There's zero forward movement. I don't do
Mm.
any forward movement in these warm-ups.
Yeah, yeah, that's
And then
awesome.
kind of I throw some push-ups in there, some deep squats, some I call them skater lunges where they're going like kind of backward and rotational. And it's just like and then I do a lot of shoulder mobility. That was one thing I figured out at Loyola is like the more shoulder mobility I did, the less hamstring problems I had. And so I have a lot
Mm.
of
Oh,
variety in
that's
there.
awesome.
And then I'll get you with 30 seconds more and then you can cut me off. But I do think like with the value of coordination based strength work,
Mm.
the destabilized load of a water bag is really healthy for track athletes because things are just so uniform and straightforward. I think getting some of that destabilizing load with a water bag kind of throwing them off is really healthy as well. And so I kind of think of coordination based
Mm.
strength in that kind of general zone of training, if you will. And so, that's something I've gone to as well.
Yeah, giving it that like team sport flavor, it's that's where
Yeah,
it's at. So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. Well, hey, man, I wish we had a few more minutes to unpack that, but we'll have to save it to next time as well as like, shoot, we didn't really get in the weight room so much, but hey, Bob, it was
Yeah.
awesome having this conversation. I really enjoyed it. So thanks for taking the time today.
Joel, it's a pleasure to be on here and thanks for having me. Appreciate all you do with the podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next week.